the cost of selling your house. Stay tuned. Hi, I'm Sharon Rosa, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Yes, I took a couple of weeks off. It's been a little chaotic in the Rosa household. I'll let you know if it's good or bad someday. But anyhow, welcome back to my YouTube channel. When you have a second, please subscribe at the bottom of the page. In this week's video, I want to talk about the costs that sellers bear in a real estate transaction. And I know I talked about it probably a year or so ago, but it is worth repeating because it's something that is always part of the discussion. And how it comes up is somebody asks me to list their house, and they of course want to know what it's going to cost them. In a real estate transaction in Western Pennsylvania, and in most real estate transactions, the seller pays the real estate agent costs. They're also going to have closing costs. They might end up having seller's concessions. If they're buying a house, they have to prepare for what they're going to be spending and moving expenses. So let me back up and kind of break each of those down for you. So when you're selling your house, you probably, as you go through the process, think, well, and you probably go on, what's my house worth? And real estate agents, myself included, will send out things and say, hey, you can get a free estimate or evaluation for your home. And I can certainly do that for you if you're selling your house. And once you do that, you're probably sent emails from different people. We get them from who we financed through for this house, telling you what your house is worth right now. So in your head, you start to think, okay, I can get X amount of dollars for this, and you start to do these calculations. So this is how much I have left to pay on it, or if you paid cash, or if your mortgage is paid off, this is how much I should be able to take home. But you have to consider what your costs or expenses are going to be when you list your house. If you use a real estate agent and I've talked about this before, in Western Pennsylvania, it's going to range somewhere between 5, maybe 4.5, up to 6 or 7%. And that cost does not go to your listing agent completely. The entire percentage of that does not go. If there is a cooperating broker, then the two real estate agents involved in the transaction, the listing agent, which would be the person that is helping you sell your house, and the buyer's agent, which is the person that brings people through your house to look at it to make an offer, split that 50-50. So you have to understand that. But when you start doing your calculations, figure 5 to 6%, that's safe, of the sale price of your house that you're going to be paying in real estate commission. You are going to have closing costs. And where this trips people up is generally in the transaction, the buyer gets the closing company. And in Western Pennsylvania, we use closing companies. In the South, they use lawyers or closing agents or closing attorneys. But here we use closing companies, and for the most part. And in that, you are going to have closing costs. And what happens is, because the buyer gets it, the seller sometimes doesn't know what those closing costs are going to be. So what I would suggest is, if I'm working with somebody and we know who the closing company is, I can always reach out and say, hey, can you give my sellers an estimate on what their closing costs for your company are going to be? Because the buyer generally picks the closing company. You don't, as the seller, get a say in that usually. And so at least you get a better idea. Now, I will send you an estimate of closing costs, but the closing company is going to be far closer to what that amount is going to probably be than I would be, because there are other fees in there that they vary from the closing companies. Also, remember that you have to calculate for the repairs that you might have to do from the inspections. So you should have some money set aside for those repairs. I can't tell you what that's going to be. What I can tell you that is, if you have done work getting ready to list your house, you're probably going to have already paid that money out. If you're listing it and you're kind of like, okay, well, let's see what buyers come through, you might end up with a substantial cost that you weren't calculating. So if I am putting a house on the market, I will walk through and give you suggestions, well, that's an old furnace, so you might have to replace that. Your roof is old, somebody might ask for that, or they might ask for seller's concessions, which I'll get to in a minute. So there are costs that your listing agent can kind of tip you off to, that if you haven't put money into your house, might be coming after the inspections. Or if you're not willing to do that, then you can talk about, seller's concessions. And that is saying to the buyer, look, I'm not going to repair the roof, but I will give you at closing $5,000 in seller's concessions. Okay, so it's not that you hand the money prior to closing or anything like that. At closing, then that's taken out of your amount that you're getting, that's subtracted from it. And so you will net less in that sale. Generally, those closing costs are somewhere between 1% to 3% in Western Pennsylvania. Next, you might have to consider what you are going to be paying in your next house, because you got to go somewhere. So when you're figuring out, what you're going to make from your home and what you can afford in your next home, just remember that if you're getting a mortgage, what you're paying in that new house should not be more than 25% of what you bring home. So keep that in mind too, because you don't want to sell your house and then be like, I don't have enough money to pay for this house I just bought. And finally, moving expenses. Again, that's a cost that sometimes people don't think about. So when you are selling your house, you can always say, hey, you can call moving companies and say, hey, I'm putting my house on the market. What would be your estimate for? And they're going to ask you how many bedrooms, how much furniture you have in a living room, how many square foot, and they'll kind of do an estimate based off of how much you think you're going to have to move. So those are just some of the costs. Those are the big costs that you really should consider when you are selling your house. Now, what happens is people go through those and then they want to list their house higher than they should. And when you're talking to your agent, when they give you run comps, if they say, hey, your house should be at 400, and you're like, well, I need 425. I need 425 to be able to make everything else work. You need to rethink things. That it's just, the market's not driving that. You need to listen to your real estate agent if they say, hey, you can price it there, but you might end up dropping it. And so keep that in mind. And if that's the case, then you might have to go back and rethink what you're doing, maybe what you're purchasing. That's it. I just wanted to kind of go over those because even though I've talked about it before, I get that question all the time. And you should be aware of, what that process is going to look like and your expenses on the seller side. That's it for this week. I'm Sharon Rosa. I hope you have a wonderful week. If you have any questions or want to talk about listing your house or finding a home, you can email me at sharonrosa@kw.com. I would be happy to help. Let me know that you're out there. Please subscribe below, and I will see you maybe every 2 weeks now until life is not so crazy. Have a great week, and I will see you soon.